Hey, welcome back to another episode of Unconventionally Systemic. I am joined, as always, by the magnificent Marianne, the lovely Lola, the fabulous Fazana, and today we're going to be talking about, yay, racism in the therapy room. Woo! Yeah, it's not that great though, is it?
And it's a bit of a boo, boo, boo.
Exactly. Boo hiss. It's like a panto villain, racism in the therapy room. I suppose I wanted to think about this because of experiences that I've had over the last few years. And yeah, I just wanted to I suppose I'm wanting to explore a little bit about other people's experiences, hear from other people's experiences, and think about what we do as therapists and the support that we get in terms of our networks around us, our professional networks, our personal networks, how we get support and how we can work safely when issues of racism kind of arise in the therapy setting. I'm going to leave it there and I will bring in my example in a little bit, but it'd be really good to hear a little bit from you all about what your experiences have been in terms of racism in therapy setting, what your understanding of it is.
Do you know what? That's a really interesting question, Megan, because I was sort of thinking, have I experienced it? I guess obviously for me, therapeutically, my journey is a lot more recent, but I could probably think of examples in my previous, I guess, work. But one thing that did stick to mind actually was more recently, and I don't know if it's, I guess it's maybe not overt racism, but I think it's that lack of recognition of difference. So, for example, I was in a reflecting team, and actually, it was quite a diverse team. You know, in sort of in the therapy room, like there's the lead therapist, which was actually probably Afro-Caribbean descent, and there were like others. Like I think all of us actually that day were all from the global majority. And something that came up from the main client, it's in a psychosis service, just to give a bit of a picture, was I think him hallucinating about the way he described it, like a Muslim man chasing him. And there's just certain things that he said, you know, when we all look at each other like, this is awkward, but also the fact that his family didn't really think anything of the way they sort of described that situation. Does that make sense? And how offensive it can be as well. It was just a bit like, I mean, none of us named it in the session, obviously. We obviously spoke about it afterwards, which is the beauty of post sessions, actually, in sort of systemic and family therapy work, where you actually have that space to sometimes just share some of what you've observed and just to see, okay, is it just me or is it a shared experience, you know, what I just experienced in the session. And I guess that was one thing that kind of stuck to mind, actually, like, that's quite interesting how this sort of, with no acknowledgement basically for the difference in the room, and thinking about actually how can we share this in a way that wouldn't offend or come across as offensive to other people. But yeah, I don't know if anyone else has got any experiences that they want to maybe add.
I guess I've got loads, but I think I was just thinking about Lola, from your example. When I was doing like my community mental health, something that I often noticed was, so I mainly, one of my first jobs was in psychosis. So I used to work with generally adults who were experiencing like hallucinations and like delusions. And I remember there was a lot of, I worked with a lot of kind of like multidisciplinary teams and like community mental health teams, and sometimes some of the things that were kind of described or explained, it almost came across as ignorance, but one could also say it was also racist. So something I often had to deal with, I think you gave that example of like how this person was describing this Muslim man, but I was, for example, I had a lot of like Black Muslim clients. I was working in Lewisham at the time, and what would happen is he would do something that would be, maybe it could be seen as an act of prayer, or it could be something related to how he chooses to practice his religion, and it would be like, oh my God, he's doing this, or oh my God, he's doing, it would almost be like pathologized. I don't know if I'm making sense in how I'm saying this. For example,
You
like believing in,
definitely are.
okay, so
Yes,
it was like
yes,
this
yes.
idea of like, oh, I believing in like a higher being, because he maybe articulated that in a different way. It was almost like, oh, he's having delusions, oh, he's having kind of like, it was all kind of like pathologized. So even there was an example of, I think at some point he was like, he liked meditating, and then it was just completely misconstrued to something else. And I felt like that was one of my frustrations in working in those services, because I felt like you really had to advocate for, actually, no, this isn't a symptom of X, Y, and Z. No, this is something they're willingly doing because this is what they believe. And it's those kind of things. I just feel like I don't know if this counts as, I don't know if it was ignorance. I don't know if it was intentional, but it's just that language of pathologizing individuals who might have beliefs that maybe I don't know, the psychologist or the psychiatrist doesn't see as beliefs. I don't know. But that's kind of what was coming to my head when Lola, you were talking.
I was thinking about when you first asked that question, Megan, how I've had situations where families and young people have downright kind of called like clinicians, like people of global majority, dark skinned people, is kind of used the N-word. I've had situations where like similar to you, Fazana, where people are taking the context like the cultural or maybe the understanding of the person as a person is removed and it's made pathology, but also it's kind of, yeah, it's made into like an illness. But also there's something about making excuses for the racism, like for example in the team, kind of when discussing the case, and for example other family is being very, very racially, verbally abusive, saying, I'm not going to deal with you because of the tone of your skin. I don't want you to do anything with me, and all the people who are looking after that family are dark skinned people, are people of a global majority. And to a point where the team is discussing, or where should we go and get someone to come and work with this? And I said, excuse me, hold on here, right? Hold on here. This is the service we provide, yeah? I can't go and change the tone or color of my skin, yeah? We are here to provide a service. If people choose to not want that service because they don't like who's working with them, not because of their competence and the quality of care they're giving, but because the color of our skin, and you are perpetuating that as a senior manager or whoever, as a team, to a point where you're saying, oh, we need to go and look for alternatives. Excuse me, what is that telling us? How is that promoting safety? What are you saying exactly in terms of who is working in your service? What are you communicating? So for me, I've had real I don't like to use the word triggering, but real triggering situations where these things have happened, because it's like you're getting it from the families that you're working with sometimes, and then you're getting it from the clinicians and the managers, and there's other issues around kind of power and things like that. So like those are some of the things, and I was thinking about something you mentioned, Lola, about when these comments are made, like what we say or not say, what we do or not do, that perpetuates some of those prejudices and almost like makes it okay for that to continue to go on. Now, since I've been on the systemic journey, I've been very mouthy, and I'll use that word mouthy as in I will name things and I will say, it's okay if you're uncomfortable. You sit with the uncomfortableness, because that uncomfortableness, you need to have it to reflect on what's going on, because something clearly here is not right, that you're not able to reflect on what someone else might be going through because you are prejudiced and you're being racially kind of I don't even know the word, but let me just stop there because I'm getting too fired up about this. No, I think you made some really good points, and I think one of the things I was thinking about was the idea of if you're in a service, or we all work in various health settings, and actually if the service is made up of predominantly people of the global majority, and somebody comes in and a client or their family comes in who is has kind of racist views or has certain views that mean that they don't want to work. Well, I mean, they're racist views. I'm not going to try and sugarcoat their views for them, but they're views that are racist, and then they come in asking for a service. I suppose, thinking systemically, we're part of a wider system that, you know, we're here to provide support for people. But then we also have to think about our own safety within that and the safety of the team. But then we're kind of, it feels like we're in a real ethical bind. It feels like we're almost in a bit of a double bind, where actually it's, and this comes back to actually an experience that I had, but we're in a double bind where on one hand, it's, you know, we're here to provide a service and mental health support, but at the same time, we have a duty to keep ourselves safe as well. And either way, we aren't quite fulfilled. It feels like we're put in a position where we're not quite fulfilling our duties in some way, whether to ourselves and to, you know, our fellow colleagues, but also to the person who is in need of some kind of mental health support. I say this based on, so I work in inpatient services, adult inpatient services, and I had an experience where I wasn't informed that somebody I then went on to work with on one-to-one basis was somebody who holds very misogynistic, racist, all of the good ones, guys, all of the good ones. They hold all those kind of views that were just really bigoted. And they did identify as an incel. And I didn't realize this. And I went and had a one-to-one session with this person. And it left me, like halfway through the session, I started to realize that it wasn't safe for me to be in a space with this person. And as it started as this kind of realization unraveled, I had a very, very physical reaction to being, like, even now I can feel myself getting back into that space where I'm having that physical reaction of all over repulsion and safety. I feel like it was probably one of the only times in an inpatient setting where I've physically felt in danger. And it felt like a physical danger, but also like a psychological danger. And I've never felt that before in those kind of spaces. Sometimes feel physical danger, but that was definitely the most intense it's ever felt. And I think why I say that is that it feels like it's that double bind of, okay, well, that client actually ended up wanting to have more sessions with me and had a really good session at that point. And I was very aware of the bind that I was in. There's somebody who wants psychological support from me. Well, they want psychological support, but for me to keep myself safe, I actually really shouldn't be offering this. And I felt in a really impossible situation. And I had to, you know, I took it to supervision and I really talked it through, but it's something that still comes up for me. It's that bind that we as people of the global majority are placed in, where we have to sometimes, it feels like sometimes our personal safety, our psychological safety is put on the back burner for the sake of the service. And that isn't necessarily considered in the same way for other professionals. For our white colleagues. That was quite a monologue, guys.
No. It's I don't want to say heavy stuff, but that's quite, oh my God. What can I say? Part of me wants to say, can you define what incel is? Because, you know, some people might not know what that means or in what you described, but also I'll let you kind of do that first, but also, if anyone can talk about that. But also I wanted to say a bit more, but I'll just pause there for a moment.
Okay, I'll interject quickly with what an incel is. So an incel is it stands for involuntary celibacy, and it's a kind of small but ever-growing faction of usually young white men who hold very, very misogynistic views. They often also hold quite far-right fascist views and quite racist views. And there's a real sense in the incel community of like feeling that women kind of their bodies are should be kind of given up to men, essentially. That's kind of in a nutshell. I'm sure we won't have a large community of incels listening to this, but that's kind of the ethos of it. And they also, like I said, they also are aligned with or can be quite aligned with far right thinking and homophobic and racist ideologies as well.
Thank you, Megan. I'm thinking we've got listeners like in other countries that might not know in the UK context what we mean when we say far right or far. Also, because I get very confused about those things. Not try to minimize this very heavy topic we're talking about, but I wondered whether we could say a bit more about what that is in terms of far right views.
Okay, so far right views are kind of views that are, I'm trying to think how best to explain it. So it's basically anything that is more fascist, kind of the extremes of politics where it's much more around fascism and Nazism as well. It tends to be very, very conservative, but not conservative in the kind of nuanced way, but like very conservative in a extreme way. So in global politics, you know, we kind of all understand the ideas of what is kind of left and right in terms of more liberal thinking is more left leaning, conservative and the right. Far right is the absolute extremes of that. So we're thinking about, like I said, thinking about like neo-Nazism, fascism. I think Lola, I saw you just written in our Zoom chat, UKIP. So yeah, UKIP, National Front, BNP, so British National Party. I think UKIP stands for UK Independence Party. All of these that hold quite extreme nationalist, tends to be quite nationalist views. And then you've got like, if you're thinking about American, you're thinking about like the Proud Boys, they're quite far right as well. Although often a lot of the far right groups tend not to identify themselves as far right. They tend to see themselves as more centrist right. But I'm not here to give anybody a lecture on politics because it's certainly not my area, but it's something that is, you know, as people of the global majority, actually, we do have to have an awareness of, because we can't opt out of politics because our bodies are political just by who we are, sadly. But that's a whole different podcast episode, I think. So I'm going to leave it there.
Thank you, Megan.
I have got questions, Megan. I don't want to take you back to literally what I feel like some horrific incidents that happened. I guess for me, actually, when you did share this with us outside of this space, I had no idea what that was. And I guess I was wondering, did you even know what that was, you know, until after you had to unfortunately sit in that session with that person to then find out later on or afterwards that actually this is who this person is and there should have been no way you should have been in that room with that person. But another thing that I'm thinking before you sort of come in case you want to sort of share on this is that would be a ridiculous mistake to have made if it was the other way around. So if you were, you know, the patient, the client, whatever, you know, that would have probably never happened. And it's about that thing about safety for us as professionals. Do you know what I mean? Like, how comes our safety isn't a priority? Because that's what I feel like. That's how that hearing that makes me feel, and that's what it makes me think. And it's like, yeah, how do we make our safety a priority? But yeah.
Yeah, so I actually did know about the incels and about their kind of ideology, partly just from kind of the kind of ether, just picking things up. But yeah, so it was something that was on my radar. But I think without disclosing where I work in inner city, very, very diverse part of, like, ethnically very, very diverse part of London. And it was never going to be on my radar to think that I would be working with somebody who harbors those kinds of views. And I think that was what was possibly more shocking for me. Yeah, and it's definitely, as you say, it's definitely a lot about the safety of myself. And I followed procedures. I got like a handover. I thought I knew what the risks were, and actually this was somebody that shouldn't be working with women and or women of the global majority, and I fall into that category. So it felt like I shouldn't have been put in that position, and maybe it wouldn't have happened for other people. But yeah.
I guess, Megan, as you were talking, I was kind of thinking about this idea of keeping staff of the global majority safe from these experiences. And I always kind of think about whose responsibility is it, or who kind of I guess I'm just thinking about the system in general, because I think these experiences aren't uncommon, unfortunately. I think I have heard, and I think as you were talking, I was just thinking about like, so I worked in a prison for like 9 months, and as it was really nice, like in terms of like I really like working on in those kind of areas, I think. But one thing I found was of course, when you work in a prison, you are working with a lot of individuals who have committed quite serious crimes, and some of that can also be very racist, very homophobic, very Islamophobic, whatever phobic you can think of. And I remember actually like having to work with a lot of men who were in prison because they committed an offense that was a hate crime, that was racially motivated. And there was kind of no sort of, I guess their way of doing it was, I'm going to put warning markers on the profile, so you know that this person has racist views, or this person is an Islamophobic, or this person's anti-LGBT. Like, there would be warning markers, but there would be nothing in place to say, and it sounds crazy, but that there was nothing in place to say, don't work with this person. So if I had a referral and I looked this person up, and it would be clear that this person would be a risk to women, a risk to women of the global majority, there was kind of nothing to say to safeguard you. It was like, okay, yeah, go in. And I don't know, I just remember being so shocked, because I always imagined prison settings in particular to be quite secure and quite safe, and I thought that also applied for staff. But actually it was more to do with controlling and making sure the inmates are kind of locked up and kept away. It wasn't focused on staff safety at all. And that's why when you were talking, Megan, I was just thinking about, well, who decides this is what we're going to do and this is how we're going to run things, and what would happen if something was to happen? What would happen if I mean, luckily I didn't. I had a few traumatic experiences there, but it wasn't racially motivated. But what would have happened if I had? Just like Megan, you were in this situation, and essentially, luckily, you didn't, it made you very uncomfortable, and it sounded really traumatizing. But at the same time, like, it could have been, some things could have been worse in terms of, I guess I'm thinking about like physical aggression, and I'm just wondering, if that had happened, how would justice be served? What kind of actions would have been taken? Because I genuinely can't think of anything coming out of that. By that I mean, like, I genuinely didn't think that anything would have come out of that. Like, it would be kind of like, this has happened, oh, sorry it's happened, maybe not see that person anymore, but it's already happened. And this is the thing, it's like there's no prevention, it's more, oh, okay. And I think that's why a lot of people, particularly in like healthcare professions of the global majority, who experience kind of, there is this whole thing about the NHS being quite racist and microaggressive. I'm not saying this is like, oh my god, every single service in the NHS, but there is a lot of conversation about the NHS and how it kind of operates. And I just kind of wonder about what's being done about all of this, because I have a few friends who are nurses and they work in inpatient wards. They experience racism almost on a weekly basis, and it is excused. It's almost like, oh, this person is unwell, they're very acutely symptomatic at the moment, ignore them. And it's just like, we're always told to be the ones to deal with it. And it's, yeah, it just gets me really frustrated, I think.
I completely agree with you, because I think there's lots of I speak from a place of privilege in terms of, as a therapist going into these spaces, actually we can make choices about who we see and who we don't see to some extent. And actually, if a referral comes in that somebody, I'm like, well, actually I don't think they would benefit, or I would benefit from, mainly them, it normally comes from their side, I don't think they would benefit from seeing me because of who I am and this type of service I provide. But actually, the nursing staff, like you said, Fazana, who are, predominantly people of the global majority in the hospitals anyway, in inpatient settings, they don't have a choice. They have to, the amount of racial slurs that I hear on the ward, whether it is intentional, whether it's meant to be offensive or not, it, you know, these things get put out into that space all the time, and it usually gets explained away by somebody's not well, and sometimes it's, you know, it's people of the global majority using these racial slurs as well, and it's not necessarily thinking about the impact that it has on the staff. And I think it does have a huge toll, and I think it's thinking about what ways does the system have to keep the staff safe and sane? I say that really tentatively, but because actually they aren't safe spaces for people of the global majority working, because of all of the things that we've kind of discussed. But also we know that they make up, people of the global majority, we make up a large portion of the workforce, and a portion of the workforce that doesn't necessarily have as much autonomy in those spaces as our white colleagues, who maybe are who may be in different types of positions within the services. So
yeah, I wanted to jump in there because I was thinking about kind of some of the things you know you guys have been saying, and I was thinking about the example that I gave, and you know, in terms of whose responsibility it is. I was thinking about there's a component, from my experience, there's a component of on an individual level when it comes to like choice. And whilst I agree that we don't have a choice a lot of the times, because you work in this service, this is your livelihood and how you provide for your family and all these kind of really specific things, like in terms of individual factors, but also our own interpretations and agency over what we can do or can say about some of these things. I've worked with colleagues from a global majority who have said, this person said this word in a community setting, inpatient. I feel like you're almost told like you have to tolerate it. Whereas in the community, my from working in a community, I thought, oh, like surely, like no, you don't have to tolerate it. These are people that are coming into the clinic to see you, or you are going to visit them. It doesn't have to be you. Anyway, there was so many things, right? So when this person said, oh, you know, the family, or this person said like the N word, and they called them this and called them that, and I thought, oh, so what did you do? So what happened? And their story was, oh, well, nothing. They, you know, it doesn't affect me. It doesn't penetrate me. I'm here to, you know, and for me, I was like, oh my God, like if that was me, I would not been able to keep my cool. I would have said, that's unacceptable. You're being racially abused, and it's unacceptable. And either you can refrain from doing that right now so we can carry on with this therapeutic piece of work, or I don't have to see you right now, or I don't need to be the person providing the service. So there's something individual about me in terms of how I might respond to that, and something individual about someone else. But surely that thing affected this person because they were talking about it. They were giving us a narrative about what had happened. And then also when they were talking about it, like people like brushed it off. And I'm thinking, no. We need to talk about this. We need to digest this, and we need to figure out not only what does the person want from this, because this has happened to them. It's not happened to me, but I know my own reaction will be different, and speaking to colleagues. But this was also something that's not being talked about in terms of like the colleagues and the system. It's not something that's being validated as happening, and something that needs to be different, and something that even when people are kind of replicating and perpetuating this, it's not something that's being challenged. And I'm saying we need to challenge this type of languaging and these type of things from an individual level, whether we're affected by it there and then or not, and also on like a system level as well, in terms of organizational like power and structures and things like that. Because sometimes I feel like not naming it is almost saying it's okay for it to carry on, but also it's almost like what you guys have been saying is that what about if you name it and nothing happens? There is, and sometimes I go to an extent where I think, where Fazana, you've mentioned about people being in prison for hate crimes and racially driven and homophobic. There is laws against these things. Why is it that we tolerate it and we don't utilize the laws of the land that we have accessible to? And also, how much does it take psychologically in terms of our own safety for us to go there with some of those things?
Girl, you're going in. Um, I had so many thoughts while you were speaking, Mum, and I think one of them is, and I remember I was like, I guess, Ma'am, how would you encourage people to be brave? And then it was like, actually, it's not bravery, it's just should be a normal response to for that to not be too okay. Does that make sense? But for someone like me, I would see that as me being brave to be able to challenge that because of different past experiences or things being minimized or being made to feel like I'm playing the victim or things not been responded to in the way that I hope things will be responded to. And then again, I started thinking when you talked about the police, about the law, don't get me started. Like, I remember when I was racially assaulted, again, this is not in the workplace, but because I live in Kent and Kent is quite big. But anyway, and this was years ago. And I guess back then, it wasn't as diverse as it is now. Again, it shouldn't be about it being more diverse. Like, it should just not be racist, but let's not get into that. Anyway, so I had this racial abuse on the bus and no one did anything. Like, even some of the kids on the bus were laughing about it. The driver didn't do anything. I still laughs about it till now. I didn't put it to the police because there's no point, because literally weeks before that, my friend that was going to her house, her brother was racially assaulted and the police didn't do anything. So I was like, there's no point. My brother was like, I'm not having that. So he calls the police and reports it. Basically nothing really happened, and I was being paid £7 a month as compensation for like years. And I was just like, what am I supposed to do with that? So when it comes to the police, I wouldn't go to the law. That's just from my own experience. I'm just like, for me, I feel like there's no point. And again, I feel the same way in terms of some of the organizational structures that are in place and places where I've worked at before. And they might say stuff like, oh, go to freedom of, this freedom of something that's outside of the organization. But again, even some of the conversations that you would have with people like that, even HR and stuff like that, it kind of almost makes you think, yeah, there's no point. There's no point actually even wanting to highlight this thing or bring awareness to this thing, for me anyway, which is really sad that that's the reality. And I guess I'm wondering who else maybe feels in a similar way in terms of, there's no point. I'm just going to come in here, do my job, feed my family, and just kind of keep it moving.
That's I'm really sad to hear that you've had that experience. I'm sure it's not an experience you have alone. Like, I think other people, not trying to minimize your experience because that sounds horrible, but it breaks my heart knowing that it's not a one-off like incident. And I completely share your thoughts about the police. I've already put in the chat, I won't chat police because it's not for this podcast, I don't think. But I suppose there is something, like you said, Lola, about what is going on with, I think what I'm interested in when you're talking about, okay, people just going in, there's no accountability. What does that do to you as a person when you're going back home? Where does that go? And for me, that's the internalization of those racist ideas of feeling like, okay, well, I suppose I'm kind of not fantasizing, but kind of hypothesizing of what happens. And in my head, maybe one of the things that will happen is that you go, okay, maybe I'm not good enough maybe I'm not worthy enough to go and report to the police because the police don't serve me in the same way they serve other people. And then maybe I deserve to be treated in this way. Maybe I deserve people to be calling me these racial slurs. No, and I'm not saying that in terms of it being overtly thinking that, but it's those messages that get fed into us that then impact how we then relate to other people and how we then think about other people when we're working with them. Thinking about, okay, well, it's why. So I have people saying to me, why are you getting so het up when somebody says, uses racial slurs, like any racial slur? And I'm like, I'm like, because I find it offensive. No, I don't have to identify as that ethnicity to find what you've said offensive. And I think it's then people are like, well, no, don't worry about it. And I think it's that kind of, I think I'm losing my thread here, but it's what gets internalized in us as well, and how we minimize things, and then what that does to our relationships going forward.
I guess some of the thoughts that I had was around like the impact, the effects of all of these things that it has, is that I was saying that this impacts us whether we admit it or not, whether we like it or not, whether we are conscious of it or not at various points in our lives. I like on a different episode, I think I spoke, or maybe I was just having conversation with you ladies about this, about maybe even it was an episode. I don't even remember. I talk too much. But anyway, guys, you probably remember if you listened. Like me as a parent, and the ideas that how I prepare my child for the outside world is influenced by the racism that I've had. Is influenced why do we have to teach our children to accept themselves in the skin that they're in? It's because we've had experiences where we've not been accepted, where we've been we've been abused, we've been whatever. All of these things have happened. So it's a very personal thing that happens. And sometimes I think part of the dilemma is getting to a place of naming it. Part of the dilemma is getting to a place of digesting that within, not digesting it, I mean dissecting it within ourselves, and kind of reflect it on, what does this mean for me? How is it impacting me? What is going on here? Because sometimes we don't realize some of the things, in systemic world, these things that happen impacts. For example, if we end up having corrective scripts, we might not even know that this is why. We might not even realize this is why. And I think it's important for us to ponder on some of these things, and in terms of where it goes. So you're right, Megan. Yeah, where does it go? And how long does it stay there for? And what does it take for it to open up again? And what happens when it gets opened up again as well?
Mariam, when you were talking about when you said it's about naming things, I was thinking about the more subtle racial comments that would happen within the therapy room. I think especially in sessions, it can almost sometimes, it can kind of feel like gaslighting. I don't know how to explain it. It's like, so I did have an experience which I kind of almost don't want to go into because it just makes me feel a type of way. But I think what happened was there was almost like a passing comment made in the session, and it was almost subtle enough where I almost felt like if I named it there, I would be seen as reactive, or I'd be seen as making it a big deal. But it was still like reflecting back on that, like I probably would have named it, but it's in those moments of like uncomfortability where something's kind of said, but it's not said explicit enough, where maybe it almost makes you question whether you should name it or not. And I find that particularly over time, my experiences of being kind of racially discriminated against has kind of evolved. So like I think in community mental health it was much more explicit, and that's because I was working with quite symptomatic individuals. So essentially a lot of it was excused or explained because they're unwell, or etc., etc. Whereas now I work with a different kind of demographic where I'm working with adolescents, and I'm working with families, and sometimes I'd work with certain parents, and it's just that I think outside of this episode, Megan, you used a sentence and I really liked it. I think it was like coded language. I think that was the word, and that I think that's what I think that just kind of describes it properly. It's almost like things that are said that are explicit enough for me to feel a type of way, for me to feel discriminated, or for me to feel the kind of difference, but it's also not explicit enough for me to name it without having to worry about whether I'm going to come across a certain way. And I think it also has a lot to do with the team that you're in. So I mean, this experience is not in my current context, but in my previous one, I was in a team where they were lovely people, but there was that uncomfortability of being different, and it was really, I was made to feel different. So I almost felt like I didn't have the backing of my team where I could maybe name it, because I felt like it was going to go back on me, if that makes sense. And sometimes these are the things that can be really, really uncomfortable, because then you're just told to kind of sit with it. Yeah, and I don't know if that kind of resonates or if that connects with anyone.
Yes. We're like, some of us are nodding here. You saying that Fazana, is making me think about a time when that undertone of something being implied led me to question why I was like, I reacted, but why the response I got back. And I don't know what possessed me to just keep on and on about this, as in talk about it and say, oh, I think this is to do with that. I was just wondering, like, these systemic wonderings, and it's like, oh, I'm not sure, I'm quite curious, is this to do with that, or is it today, or is it da-da-da? And this is one of the things like that I've found really invaluable in the systemic kind of teaching and learning that I've gained, is that the subtle challenging of something in a curious way that sometimes can bring up so many different things and make someone else kind of think about things. But also, because you're naming something but you're not really naming it, you're just like, oh, I'm not, do you know what I mean? To the point where it escalated because I was implying racism, because that's what I felt, and I was questioning whether this is what was being implied in certain things that were being said to me. And I was just questioning and I was questioning what was going on. Is this what's going on? Is this what's... But it really affected me so negatively, to the point where I was off for such a long time, to the point where it was so difficult. But anyway, I said the system needs to change. Something needs to change. If I'm feeling this is implied for me in this therapeutic setting, we don't really, anyway, what's going on here? But anyway, I don't know if we're going off topic, but we've covered so many things so far. But anyway, I don't know what you guys think about kind of where we're at the moment.
I think it's all connected, and I think we've talked about this before, that when we talk about some of these topics, it does link to other things, and it's hard to separate, compartmentalize, away from something else. Did you get what I mean? So I don't think we've gone off topic at all, and I feel like I'm generally more quiet in some of these topics because I think a lot, but also I feel internally frustrated that years and years on, we're still having the same conversations. And yeah, I was going to say something else, but I didn't. I think, okay, so for me, I think, obviously, because whilst we're studying, I've been off a lot of social media, but LinkedIn, and I've been seeing a lot of DEI roles just popping up, diversity, equality, and inclusion roles. And I'm just like, again, it's that scaffolding of, we're not going to deal with the issue, we're just going to put somebody there. And most of them are usually of the global majority, or people that are from obviously diverse backgrounds, whether that's global majority or LGBTQI community. It was going to put that person there as a face of something, but really not get into the root of what's actually going on and actually fixing some of those problems. And sometimes even putting too much pressure on that one person. It's not just a one person thing. It's not let's bring one person in. It's a collective thing. Does that make sense? But anyway, don't want to get into like something else. Maybe we'll talk about some of these things in other episodes. But I guess essentially for me, I want to, I don't know, I want to hear, and not just from people like us, but I want to hear other people actually lending their voice to say, actually, for me, this is what I'm doing to make that tiny bit of difference in my organization. This is what I'm doing to speak out or to speak up, or, I think, I'm hoping and I'm looking forward to hearing some of that, and not just someone saying, "Oh, I'm really sorry you've gone through that." That's not, maybe doesn't share some of your background, and then that's it. No checking in, another time, or even genuinely trying to do something about it. But yeah.
Yeah, I do agree. And I think it speaks a little bit, and I think it does. We're definitely kind of expanding it out and thinking, it feels like we're thinking a lot more about the institutional dynamics and how these structures serve or maybe don't serve people of the global majority that exist within, whether that's clients, patients, service users, or staff, and kind of bringing it back to what's happening in the therapy room. It's really hard to separate that out because it's so interlinked and it's so connected. And I think definitely for me, when you were all talking, I was thinking a little bit about how helpful it would be if actually it wasn't just people of the global majority having these conversations and being able to pick up the subtleties and the coded language, because there's definitely a privilege in not learning what that coded language is and kind of going la 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 la, pretending you can't hear it. There's a real, and actually it puts quite a lot of the emphasis on people of the global majority to say, okay, do you know what? I'm actually physically exhausted from this. I can't be the person experiencing this and the person finding a solution for it and the person educating you about it. I can't be all of these roles, and live a healthy, productive life, quote unquote, whatever that might be. But I'm very aware that I'm also talking quite a lot now, and I want to hear if anybody's got any kind of final thoughts before we wrap up today's episode.
I suppose a final thought from me, in addition to kind of what Lola was saying in terms of wanting to hear back from people, I'm also quite interested in people's individual, like I want to say internal, like changes or reflections or things that they've, their own realization and things, and how that's kind of like, how they're living their lives given some of the experiences they've had, or how are they different, or how are they surviving this, I guess. And in terms of that psychological safety that we started with, how are people surviving or getting through this? I'm really keen on those ideas and lessons and things like that.
Any other thoughts? No? Okay, we will leave it for today. Thank you so much. As always, you can email us your thoughts, your comments, questions at unconventionallysystemic@outlook.com. We look forward to hearing from you. Bye.
It's not cutting out, but I could hear some weird noise. But...
Oh, sorry, that might have been me rubbing my crystals.
Sorry. I was like, it's not the usual noises that we get either. I don't know what's going on in people's minds.
I'll put my crystal down. Apologies.
Did you say you put your crystal down? Megan, what's going on? Do you want to talk about it?
Oh, are you into like the crystallography?
For my massage, I go for massages every now and then, and my massage therapist is really into them, and so she gave me one. Yeah, she always gives me crystals when I go and see her, so I'm like, okay, I'll take a crystal.
Yeah.
Oh, so it's for massages.
Yeah,
No,
so no, it's for like
to
power. So this one is for like amethyst is for like everything apparently. And
is it the purple one? That one?
Yeah, and then
what's it meant to do?
I think it's supposed to help with like everything in life. So you're supposed to carry it with you.
Have we brought it in for the podcast then, Meg? Is that what it is?
Just around her to absorb any bad energy and spread good vibes.
There's one that she gave me that I've lost, but it's supposed to be for like helping with your studies. And I was like,
Megan, that's the one we need.
I was like, where is my brain crystal? Where is my brain crystal?
You need to ask her for that. You need to ask her for another one for that.
Do you think it works, Megan?
Somewhere. Nah, I'm not really into that kind of thing. But then I'm also the kind of person that doesn't want to jinx it if it is something that works. I'm just like, let me just keep it in case.
You're on the fence. You like the fence, don't you? You like
I love the fence.
Yeah.